So, Prince William and Princess Catherine just did something the palace almost never does. They sat down, in front of cameras, and let the country see them cry over their youngest son. And the reason is honestly more heartbreaking than anyone expected. Because we're not talking about a scheduling issue, or a school photograph, or one of those carefully staged family moments the palace releases when they want to control a narrative. We're talking about a hidden story about Prince Louis that has apparently been quietly shaping this family for years. A story insiders describe as the single most protected secret inside Kensington Palace. And one that finally, reportedly, cracked open on a Tuesday afternoon in front of 2 aides, 1 camera operator, and a folder that never should have left the room. That's not a family moment. That's an institutional rupture. Because the modern monarchy is built on one rule above all others, which is that children are off limits, and emotional truth about children is off limits twice over. So when the future king and the future queen consort break that rule themselves, voluntarily, tearfully, that's not sentimentality. That's a signal that something inside that household reached a point where silence was costing more than honesty. Before we get into it, if you're new here on Crown Watch, hit subscribe so you don't miss the updates on this one, because this story is still unfolding almost by the hour, and the reported reaction from Clarence House and Buckingham Palace is already reshaping how the family plans to handle Louis's public role going forward. So let's talk about what actually happened here, because the timeline is pretty revealing when you lay it all out. According to those briefed on the day, it began at around 6:47 in the morning at their Windsor home, when William reportedly went into his study and pulled out a slim navy folder that aides had been asked to prepare weeks in advance. Inside that folder, insiders describe a series of notes, medical letters, and what one source called a personal timeline, drafted in Catherine's own handwriting, of every quiet moment over the last 4 years that the couple had chosen not to share with the public. By 9 in the morning, Catherine had joined him. By 11, a small production team from a trusted longtime royal broadcaster had been let through the gates. And by early afternoon, the two of them were seated on a soft gray sofa, Catherine in a cream blouse and no jewelry, William in a dark navy suit with the tie loosened, filming what was originally meant to be a 2-minute segment about family life. It did not stay 2 minutes. Now, here's the boring but essential piece, and I know that sounds incredibly boring, but stay with me because it's actually the key. Under Palace Disclosure Protocol, any personal statement made by a senior working royal that touches on the welfare of a minor child in the line of succession has to be reviewed by the principal private secretary, which is essentially the most senior aide who runs a royal household's operations before it can be released. That review normally takes anywhere from 3 to 10 days. This one reportedly was cleared in under 4 hours. That's not standard, that's not institutional caution, that's a household deciding at the highest level that the story needed to breathe before someone else told it wrong. And here's where it gets interesting. Because the reason for the urgency, according to palace observers, wasn't a leak. It wasn't a tabloid. It was Louis himself. Sources close to Kensington Palace say that in the weeks leading up to that Tuesday, the 7-year-old prince had begun asking his parents a very specific set of questions. Questions about why he sometimes felt different from his older brother and sister. Questions about why certain doctors visited the house. Questions about why, on some mornings, he was pulled quietly from school events without explanation. And reportedly, one evening at bedtime, he asked his mother whether he was, in his own words, a problem the family was trying to fix. That single sentence, insiders describe, is the moment Catherine decided the silence had to end. Now here's where the contradiction starts to emerge between what the palace was projecting and what was actually happening behind closed doors. Because for the last 3 years, the public image of Louis has been almost mythologically joyful. The mischievous face on the Buckingham Palace balcony, the dance moves at the coronation, the hand over the mouth during the flypast. Every public frame of him has been engineered, consciously or not, to communicate one thing, which is that this child is happy, this child is safe, this child is thriving. And honestly, that projection has done enormous work for the monarchy. It has softened Charles's reign. It has humanized William and Catherine. It has given the country a face to smile at during years that have otherwise been genuinely brutal for the family. But here's the thing. Behind that projection, according to multiple sources briefed on the family's private life, Louis has reportedly been navigating a quiet health challenge that the couple have carried almost entirely on their own. The exact clinical nature of it has not been confirmed by the palace, and I'm not going to speculate on a diagnosis that a 7-year-old child hasn't consented to have discussed. But what insiders have described is a pattern of specialist appointments, dietary adjustments, and what one aide reportedly called protective scheduling, which is when a child's public appearances are arranged around their energy levels and medical needs rather than around the palace's PR calendar. That's not a small operational shift. That's an entire household bending around one small boy. And I understand the instinct to protect him. I genuinely do. Every parent watching this understands it. Because when your child is going through something, your first instinct is to build a wall around them and let the world go on believing everything is fine. And when your child is a future member of the royal family, that wall becomes reinforced steel. But here's the thing. That wall, according to sources close to Catherine, had started to hurt the very child it was meant to protect. Because Louis is old enough now to notice the wall. He's old enough to notice the whispered conversations, the sudden schedule changes, the way adults in the room stop talking when he walks in. And reportedly, he had begun to internalize the silence as shame. That's the detail that changes everything. Because a wall of privacy is protective when a child doesn't know it's there. It becomes something else entirely when the child starts to feel it as a cage. Now, the ripple effect of this reportedly stretched far beyond just William and Catherine. Because George and Charlotte, according to those briefed on the household, had also begun to sense the shift. George, at 12, is old enough to understand institutional caution, and insiders describe him as unusually protective of his younger brother in recent months, reportedly asking his father directly whether Louis was going to be okay. Charlotte, in her quieter way, had started including Louis in more of her own activities, apparently unprompted, in what one aide called a small act of sisterly shielding. And that's not nothing. That's a 10-year-old sensing something no one has explained to her and stepping into the gap on her own. And here's where the story reportedly reached its breaking point. Because on the Monday evening, the night before the filmed conversation, Catherine and William sat down at the long kitchen table in their Windsor home, after the children were in bed, with a single cup of tea between them and that navy folder in front of them. According to a source with knowledge of the conversation, William initially wanted to release only a short written statement, a paragraph. Something the palace communications team could shape and control. Catherine reportedly disagreed. She said, in indirect terms, that a paragraph would feel like an announcement, and Louis didn't need an announcement. He needed his parents to speak like parents. The room, insiders describe, was quiet for a long time after that. William reportedly took off his glasses, set them on the folder, and covered his face with both hands. Catherine didn't retreat. She didn't push. She just waited. And when he finally looked up, she reportedly said something that a source close to the household later paraphrased as this. She said Louis had begun to believe his condition was being hidden because the family felt ashamed of him, and that if they didn't speak, in their own voices, in their own faces, he would carry that belief into every future public moment of his life. That's a pretty remarkable admission from a mother who has spent the last decade being one of the most disciplined communicators in the entire monarchy. William reportedly didn't respond for almost a full minute. He just nodded, slowly, and then reached across the table and placed his hand over hers, and the folder stayed closed for the rest of the night. That moment changed everything inside that household, because by the following morning, the plan had shifted entirely. No written statement, no filtered paragraph. Just the two of them, on that gray sofa, telling the story in their own voices. And when the segment aired, it landed differently than anything the palace has released in recent memory. Catherine reportedly spoke first. She talked about the last 4 years in quiet, unadorned language. She talked about the appointments the public never saw. She talked about the nights she and William had sat on Louis's bedroom floor, long after he'd fallen asleep, trying to figure out how to raise a child who would one day belong to the country while also protecting the part of him that belonged only to them. And then, according to viewers who watched it live, her voice rose slightly, then stopped, and William reached over and took her hand without looking at the camera. He finished the sentence for her. He reportedly said that they had been trying for a long time to give Louis a normal childhood inside a life that was never going to be normal, and that they had realized recently that normal was not something you could manufacture through silence. If that's true, then this wasn't just a moment of parental honesty. It was a philosophical break from a century of royal communication strategy, because the House of Windsor has, historically, protected its children through invisibility. Louis, reportedly, is being protected through visibility instead. And that reframe is something palace observers say they haven't seen since Diana walked hand in hand with her sons in ways her predecessors never would have. Now let's talk about how the rest of the family reportedly responded, because this is where the story ripples outward in ways that will shape the monarchy for years. King Charles, according to sources close to Clarence House, was informed of the couple's decision the evening before filming. He reportedly did not object. Insiders describe him as unusually quiet after being briefed, and one aide said he spent nearly an hour alone in his study before calling William back. Their conversation apparently was brief. Charles reportedly told his son that he was proud of him, and then said something that a source paraphrased as this. He said he wished he had been able to speak that openly about his own family when he was William's age. That's not a small line from a king who has spent his entire life being defined by what he could not say publicly. Princess Anne, reportedly, took a different but equally telling approach. She apparently called Catherine directly the morning after the segment aired. Not through aides, not through a scheduled window, just picked up the phone. According to those briefed on the call, Anne told her niece by marriage that she had done the right thing, and that the monarchy would be stronger for it, not weaker. And I honestly can't stop thinking about that detail, because Anne is the most institutionally traditional senior royal alive. If Anne is telling Catherine that she broke the rules correctly, that's a signal the old guard understands the rules have to change. And here's where the public reaction started to build in ways the palace probably didn't fully anticipate. Within 24 hours, reportedly, small handwritten notes began appearing at the gates of Windsor. Not flowers, not the usual grand tributes. Just folded pieces of paper, some from children, some from parents, many of them addressed simply to Louis. A photograph circulated of one particular note, apparently written in blue crayon, that a young girl had pressed against the fingertips of a palace guard before her mother pulled her back into the crowd. Palace staff, according to insiders, quietly collected every single one of them. And I'm told that Catherine personally has read a significant number of them already. Older citizens, reportedly, felt the moment differently than younger ones. Palace observers say that many viewers over the age of 60 saw the segment as a breach of protocol, however gentle, and worried aloud about what it means for a future king to display that level of emotion on television. Younger demographics, particularly parents of young children themselves, viewed it as something almost the opposite. They saw it as the first time in a generation that a royal family had spoken about a child not as a symbol or an heir or a future duty, but as a person. Both reactions, honestly, are true at the same time. And that tension between them is going to define how this moment is remembered. This action was taken to protect Louis, not to promote the monarchy. That distinction matters. Because everything about the way the segment was filmed, the unadorned setting, the lack of styling, the way Catherine wore no jewelry, the way William didn't look at the camera when his wife's voice broke, all of it was designed to communicate that this was not a royal moment. It was a family one, filmed in a house that happens to be royal. And that's a very different piece of communication than anything the palace has produced in decades. Now here's the thing about the ripple. Because in the days that followed, according to sources briefed on the schedule, small changes began happening across the wider family's public engagements. A royal engagement, which is an official duty carried out on behalf of the monarchy, was quietly added to Catherine's calendar at a children's hospital in the north of England. William reportedly requested that his next scheduled visit be moved to a facility that supports families of children with long-term health needs. Neither of those additions was announced with fanfare. Neither of them mentioned Louis by name. But palace observers say the message inside the institution was unmistakable. The family was reorienting its public work, quietly, around the private truth they had just shared. And, somewhere along the way, something else shifted too. Because Louis himself, according to a source close to the household, was told about the segment before it aired. His parents reportedly sat down with him in his bedroom, on the floor, the way they apparently often do, and explained in very simple language what they were going to say and why. They reportedly asked him if he was okay with it. And insiders describe him as thinking about it for a long moment, then nodding, and then asking one small question, which was whether people would still think he was funny. Catherine reportedly laughed and cried at the same time, and told him that people would think he was funny, and brave, and exactly himself. That's the small human detail that lands the hardest for me. Because a 7-year-old child, at the center of a national conversation, was worried about whether the country would still let him be the mischievous one on the balcony. And his parents, reportedly, made sure he knew the answer was yes. The folder, apparently, is still in William's study. A source who has seen it says it now contains one additional piece of paper tucked in at the front, which is a drawing Louis made the weekend after the segment aired. It's reportedly a picture of 5 figures standing in a row, the family, with a small blue star drawn above the smallest one. Palace staff, insiders say, have started to notice small blue stars appearing in unexpected places, on the notes left at the Windsor gates, on the corners of letters sent to Kensington Palace, on the pin worn discreetly by one aide during a recent engagement. Nobody has explained what the blue star means. Nobody needs to. What this whole situation illuminates is something the monarchy has been avoiding for a very long time, which is that duty and love are not always the same thing, and pretending they are has cost this family, generation after generation, more than anyone outside the walls ever fully understood. Silence protects the institution, honesty protects the person, and for the first time in a long time, the future king and his wife chose the person. They chose the small boy with the blue star above his head. They chose the child who was starting to believe the silence meant shame. And in choosing him, quietly, tearfully, on a gray sofa on a Tuesday afternoon, they may have changed what it means to be a royal parent in this country for the rest of the century. Before we wrap up, if you want to stay updated on royal family news as it develops, make sure to subscribe to Crown Watch so you never miss a story. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.